Welcome to Health+Tech, the podcast where we explore the law that applies at the intersection of healthcare and technology. Hosted by McGuire Woods, episodes feature healthcare innovators and updates on the laws that apply to digital health businesses.
Welcome to the Health+Tech podcast. I'm Kristen McDermott Woodrum, a healthcare partner in the Atlanta office of McGuire Woods. I'm joined by my partner, Holly Buckley, who's based in Chicago and chairs the McGuire Woods Healthcare Department. Holly and I lead the McGuire Woods Digital Health, Technology, and Innovation practice and are hosts of this Health+Tech podcast. Today, we are excited to welcome to the podcast Jon Moore. Jon is the Senior Vice President, Consulting Services and Customer Success, and Chief Risk Officer at Clearwater, with a background in privacy and security law, technology, and healthcare. Jon holds a BA in economics from Haverford College, a law degree from Penn State University's Dickinson Law, and an MS in electronic commerce from Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science and Tepper School of Business. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Jon, we're going to dig into your life story a little bit to start out here. As we just heard from Kristen, you've had a really interesting professional background. You started as an attorney, you held multiple roles at PwC, and now you're at Clearwater. Can you tell us a little about this journey and how you've ended up where you are?
Sure. It's a bit of a circuitous route, I guess, to get to where I got to today in retrospect. But I think like maybe many somewhat familiar to you and certainly familiar to many attorneys, started out in more of a traditional path. My father was an attorney, and so he was guiding a bit of that and did the clerking for the judge thing and was interested in potentially doing trial work. So was a public defender for a while, which is an interesting experience if you've ever had it. I was arguing a case before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court about 2 months after passing the bar, which was interesting. Did that for a little while and started to kind of get burned out relatively rapidly with that. And my father suggested that maybe I wanted to explore some additional or other areas of practice and started doing work with estate and business planning for high net worth individuals. And as a result of that, a couple things happened. One was doing a lot of presentations as part of business development for the practice, but also we joined a group that was using technology. You ladies are probably too young to remember this, but when the World Wide Web was invented, that was kind of a new thing, and it started to impact our law practice. And we started to use message groups with the estate planning group we were part of, and explore that a bit. And that was really interesting to me. It was really, I could tell that thought that it was going to be a very powerful technology, and became more and more interested with it over time. And in fact, probably more interested in the technology than I was with the estate planning type of work, which got kind of boring for me quickly. And I started to look for opportunities to get a better understanding of e-commerce and the World Wide Web, and to think about how that might be impacted from a legal career perspective. Was fortunate enough to get into a program at Carnegie Mellon, which was a joint degree program from their School of Computer Science and their business school. So half of our courses were computer science, half of them were business, with the intention of creating individuals who were able to navigate between the two, because there was a recognition that there was this disconnect between the technology folks and the business folks, which impeded the development of technology that would be really effective in a business setting. Was the second attorney in the world to do that and get through that program, which was very challenging for me. Most of my peers were either secure software engineering type folks or engineering backgrounds, and/or already had MBAs. So it was a bit different for me coming from a legal background. But while I was there, unfortunately, the 9/11 events occurred, and I was working on a special project in security and privacy with one of the professors there who was internationally known in the security field. And I was also doing work for a defense contractor out of DC who was sponsoring a project that we worked on. And as a result of that, had an opportunity to present at a national conference associated with the circumstances of 9/11 and the implications for IT security more generally. And that went particularly well. And the DC contractor who was sponsoring that started working on me to come to DC and work with them. And I had every intention of practicing law and cybersecurity, e-commerce type of things. And they convinced me that I needed more experience in system development if I really wanted to do that, and then I should come to DC. And so I did, and actually came up with an idea for a compliance and cybersecurity and IT governance compliance system for the federal government. FISMA was just coming out then, and we started building that for a number of federal agencies while I was there. However, that company was purchased maybe about a year after I was there, and I was getting recruited by PricewaterhouseCoopers at the time, who was restarting their federal practice, and so I made the jump to PwC. And at PwC started in security, privacy. They were, again, restarting their federal practice. So it was part of that federal practice startup. While doing that, a number of different things happened. I started kind of working up out of security into some of the other service areas that PwC provided. But also, I was asked to help with a project at the National Institutes of Health that we were having some challenges with. And I went and did that, and did that successfully. And as a result of that, I was asked to stay on as one of the leaders in our federal healthcare practice at that time. So got through that, spent a lot of time with NIH and HHS and Indian Health Service and a number of other folks in the federal health environment, and did that. Was there for quite a few years, working at PwC. Ultimately, left there to go back to the practice of law when my father became ill and needed some assistance with his law practice. Unfortunately, shortly after that, he ended up passing away, and it took me some time to shut his law practice down at that point. After that, was doing back into consulting again, and ultimately was recruited by Clearwater to come on and help them as their chief risk officer, and ultimately was asked to also take over responsibility for their consulting team and customer success teams as well. So that's probably the dime tour as opposed to the nickel tour of my life. So,
thank you. That it's super unique path, and each different experience really has, I'm sure, contributed to a lot of the work that you're doing today. Would love to hear a little bit about that. What are some of the things that you do at Clearwater, and how does that translate into the client engagements that you're working on?
Sure. Well, it's interesting you say that. When I first was offered the position with Clearwater, I was talking to my wife about it, and she encouraged me to take the position because it essentially consisted of everything I had done all together at once. So there was there's a compliance component to what we do, mainly focused on HIPAA, but more broadly in healthcare compliance that we help organizations with, and cybersecurity more broadly compliance areas. So there's that element to it, that legal element to it. We spend a lot of time working with attorneys in the healthcare space to assist them with issues that their customers are having around cybersecurity and HIPAA more broadly. So there's that piece to it. I also do a lot of public speaking and writing on behalf of Clearwater to make sure that our customers sort of have a perspective on what's happening in healthcare generally, and more specifically in some particular areas that are niche areas of expertise for me that I've developed over time. So that continues on. The cybersecurity, of course, is a big part of what we do, and we've really grown the services that we offer during the time that I've been here at Clearwater, to be more of the ability to provide a comprehensive set of solutions to the healthcare industry and different segments within the healthcare industry as well. Because I'm sure, as you're well aware, there's some significant differences between different types of organizations with healthcare, and they have their unique needs and expectations and strategies, et cetera, that have to be taken into consideration from a compliance as well as a cybersecurity perspective. So do a lot of work there as well, and having come with the experience of leading consulting teams at PricewaterhouseCoopers, also leading that team as well, and helping the consultants to develop throughout their career and be on that path to mastery, to constantly be looking at how they can improve their skill set as well, is really important and deliver value to our customers.
That's all very interesting. And as you know, Clearwater offers a range of services, but also technologies that are focused on risk assessment and data security. So Jon, what role do you think technology can play in an effective cybersecurity program?
Sure. Well, it's absolutely necessary. When I think of a cybersecurity program, if I look at what are the building blocks of such a program, we think of or speak in terms of controls, and there's different types of controls. There, we can think of it as administrative and technical and physical controls, and certainly from a technical control perspective, since we're building IT systems, most of those controls exist within the IT systems themselves, and there's all sorts of things from things that would be very familiar to most people, like passwords and now multi-factor authentication. I think pretty much everybody's familiar with, and those are types of technical controls that exist. And in addition to that, there's other solutions that are technology related, for example, to search for vulnerabilities in your environment and manage intrusions into your environment, but also from an administrative perspective, some of the more administrative controls, including risk analysis. There's opportunities to do a more efficient and effective job of executing on those administrative type of controls through the use of technology itself. So one of the things that Clearwater has become known for in particular is our software solution, IRM analysis that facilitates the risk analysis process that's required by HIPAA. And as probably most of this audience knows, risk analysis, there's lots of things out there in the world that are thought of as risk analysis in the cybersecurity space. That's a very particular thing for risk analysis under HIPAA and HIPAA's security rule. So it's a bit of a term of art in that respect. Most I think, defined by the guidance that OCR put out a little over a decade ago. When Clearwater was first created, Bob Chaput, our founder, recognized the challenge with doing risk analysis in the way that at least it seemed to be envisioned under the HIPAA security rule. And he created a software solution with the other folks here at Clearwater to facilitate the execution of that risk analysis. And that's really has distinguished much of what we've done historically. Recently, we are also, because of all the work we've done and the data that we have associated with that, we've been able to introduce artificial intelligence and some other capability within the software itself to facilitate the ability for organizations to get a better, clearer picture of where their risks are within the organization and make better, more informed decisions about how they're going to treat those risks on an ongoing basis. And so it's not just the compliance aspect of it, which is important, obviously, from a HIPAA security perspective, but also that I think the real intent of that process is to help organizations make those more informed decisions about how best to manage their risk in a reasonable and appropriate way.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's fascinating. So HIPAA is generally the first law people think about for healthcare privacy and security, but there are a number of other federal agencies and also state governments that are becoming really active in this area. This summer, the SEC adopted rules requiring public companies to disclose cybersecurity incidents and their processes for assessing, identifying, and managing material risks from cybersecurity threats, including board oversight. What advice do you have for these larger organizations?
Sure. So the FTC regulations are similar to HIPAA. Another I think legislative induced attempt to get organizations to truly put into place an effective cyber risk management program and to start to make responsibility for those risk treatment decisions and managing that risk at the board level and leadership level. And I think that's important because at the end of the day, it's those folks who have the ability to fund an appropriate program. And so that's particularly important for an effective program is to have sponsors who are able to make those types of decisions. So if you're an organization that falls under those requirements, it's important to, I think, evaluate to the extent to which you have a program in place and look for opportunities to improve that, certainly from a governance structure perspective, making sure that that the appropriate information is going to those folks at the board level so that they can make informed decisions, making sure that you have those processes in place to both understand, develop, and gather that information from your environment and inform those decisions is critical. Having that risk analysis, risk management, risk response planning type of approach is particularly important. For me, we often look to the National Institute of Standards and Technology special publications, and in particular, those publications associated with risk analysis and the risk management process more broadly. And if you look at the risk management process as defined within those NIST special publications, they'll talk about framing, which is really coming up with that strategy for the organization and how they're going to look at and manage risk. What's that governance structure? How are they going to evaluate risk on an ongoing basis? What's the scope of that analysis? And I think that's probably one of the areas where there's a lot of opportunity for many organizations to invest some time to more formally understand that. And in particular, for organizations that are publicly traded that probably already have or should already have an enterprise risk management program in place, align their cybersecurity risk management program with that broader ERM program. Then you can get into the analysis itself. How are you going to conduct that analysis? What's the scope of the analysis? The methodology you're going to follow to do that, making sure that that's documented and followed on an ongoing basis. Responding to those risks. So understanding what are we going to do with those risks that exceed our threshold as an organization? What's the treatment plan? How are we going to follow up to make sure that that plan is executed on and that in particular any mitigation exercises or activities are followed up on and are occurring as planned. And then ultimately monitoring the program on an ongoing basis. You need to have all of those components in place to have an effective program and make those informed decisions that I think the SEC is expecting organizations to do and report on.
Yeah, absolutely. Switching gears a little bit, many of our clients, even smaller growth companies, operate across state lines, which can subject them to a variety of different state data privacy and security laws. What advice do you give to companies who are developing an effective, to help them develop an effective data security program when they're operating under all these different regimes?
Sure. So when we talk to organizations about putting an actual security program in place, and again, the building blocks of that program are the security controls, but kind of looking above that level, what's the process that one would go to define what that program might look like? And I think that for us, oftentimes we'll again look to NIST, and in particular the NIST cybersecurity framework, as a mechanism to define the framework literally that we're going to use to align those building blocks of controls. And we want to ultimately develop a program that's going to be reasonable and appropriate for the organization. So not everybody needs a Cadillac, as they might say. What you're trying to get to is something that's reasonable, appropriate for you. And that's going to change for most organizations over time. So this isn't a once and done kind of thing, but an ongoing process that they need to go through. So what does the process look like? Well, one of the first things that they're going to want to do is understand some baseline controls that they want to put in place. So what's that baseline of controls that they should be looking for? And there's a number of different areas or places you can look for baselines. In particular, we're oftentimes now looking to the 405D HIPAA, the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices standards, as a way to look for different baseline controls for different sizes and types of organizations. I think the publications that have come out of the Joint Cybersecurity Work Group are particularly effective in helping organizations understand what's right for us, given our size and type of organization. But one of the other things they're going to need to do is they're going to need to understand all of those rules and regulations that might apply to them, and even contractual obligations that are likely to apply to them from a cybersecurity and broader compliance perspective as well. So am I subject to HIPAA? Am I subject to privacy rule and security rule, or some, maybe not as much of the privacy rule? What are the expectations of my customers? What am I going to be contractually obligated to do on an ongoing basis from a cybersecurity perspective? What other federal or state regulations might apply to me as an organization? It's a great opportunity to engage with your counsel to understand that. To have that list of requirements that are going to be applicable to our organization. And what I need to do then is looking through those requirements and working with counsel to understand what those requirements are, identify what, if any, additional controls I'm going to need to put in place above that baseline that I've established for my organization, and then implement those controls to build out that program. One of the other things I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to conduct risk analysis at that time to understand, okay, I've got my baseline, got the additional controls that are required for compliance from a compliance perspective. Now let's look at my risks. Do I have any risks now that still exceed my threshold given the controls that I have in place, or are there additional controls that I might want to consider to further reduce my risk to an acceptable level for me and my organization, given our risk tolerance and what we do as a business? All of those things together would inform the controls and the program that I'd want to have in place. And again, things change over time, so I need to constantly be looking at how's that's changing, and what, if any, additional requirements might apply to me. How's the threats that are out there, targeting organizations like mine and healthcare in particular, how are they changing, and do I need to make any changes to my control structure to address those risks? All of those things need to be managed on an ongoing basis to effectively manage the risks to the organization.
Thanks, Jon. Wanted to look at a couple of particular areas where we certainly get a fair amount of calls. First, wanted to get your sense of any trends that you're seeing with respect to ransomware attacks. How, if at all, the ransomware attacks we're seeing today different from 5 years ago? And maybe talk a little bit about how you tend to advise in some of these situations.
Sure. So the ransomware, I think that even given how prevalent it is and how much press it gets, I think many folks still underestimate the sophistication of these groups that are conducting ransomware attacks. And I mean, it's to the point where I can go out on the dark web and get a franchise for ransomware. And essentially, I'll be provided with all of the tools that I need to launch ransomware attacks in an organization. And I just need to share the ransom with the organization that provided the tools. It's that type of sophistication. There's also a specialization within the field where some folks will specialize in getting access to the organization while others specialize in deploying the ransomware. So what we're not dealing with, a trivial threat actor here. We're dealing with very sophisticated international criminal organizations and even in some cases, nation state types of organizations that are engaging in these types of activities. So what have we seen? Well, it's like any type of, let's call it arms war, where over time, as the industry has developed mechanisms, controls to protect against or limit the impact of the ransomware attacks, the ransomware actors change their tactics as well to continue to be very effective in what they do. So we've seen increases in the number of attacks. We've seen increases in the sophistication of attacks. We start to see things like, well, it's not just the ransomware, but they're also exfiltrating data. So even if you're able to overcome the ransomware, they'll say, hey, that's great, but we stole this data and we're going to expose it if you don't pay us the ransom. We've had cases where when the organizations didn't respond in a way that the ransomware actors expected, they started calling family members of the CEOs of the organization that they had targeted. I mean, we've seen some very insidious types and threatening them. We've seen some very insidious types of activity on behalf of the ransomware actors, and it just seems to continue and seems to get progressively worse over time. The latest statistics show ransomware attacks can be between, the impact on an organization between $10 and $100 million. I know for a fact there's been multiple organizations where the damages have far exceeded that, and have worked with them. It's an incredible thing to see. And unfortunately, what's becoming more and more clear, particularly for those healthcare providers that are victims of ransomware attacks, is that has a significant impact on patient safety. And if there's nothing that should scare people more than that, it's that. And you imagine yourself going into a hospital, into an ER with a critical healthcare emergency, and suddenly them not having the availability of the systems that they would typically use to monitor and provide care for you. I can't think of a kind of more frightening scenario from a cybersecurity perspective than that. And that's the kind of thing we're seeing today in healthcare, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one is one that we could probably have an entire podcast about, as with many of these topics. But we're seeing a lot of attention, both from the government and in the industry, on tracking technologies, including enforcement actions around this and class action lawsuits. Can you talk a little bit about the specific issue and how the industry has been reacting?
Yes, the sometimes called web beacons and other tracking type of technology, the Metapixel in particular for the Meta tool or other pixel type tracking tools. I mean, what these things do is as you traverse the internet, the websites that you visit are capturing information about you, and it can vary depending on the tools that are used and your browsing habits. But oftentimes they'll know where you came from and where you're going to after you leave the site. They'll also collect information about you while you're on the site in regard to what pages you visit and information that you fill out and those types of things. And so they're capturing that information about your browsing habits. They can also oftentimes get other history and things from your browser as well. When you talk about Meta and some of these Google and some of the other players that are out there that really have the ability to effectively track you as you're moving across the internet, and most of them have profiles of some sort or another that they've developed around you. So they're gathering that information primarily for purposes of marketing to you. I mean, that's the main purpose, and certainly the healthcare organizations that I've talked to that have implemented these tools, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to understand how they can better market and serve their customer base. Unfortunately, as you're well aware, we operate in healthcare, which has a highly regulated space relative to other industries in the U.S. around privacy, and the Office for Civil Rights has taken the position where, in most cases, and it gets a little gray in some areas, but for most purposes, they are saying that the use of these tracking technologies on your website or your mobile apps that folks might have is a violation of HIPAA, because you're essentially gathering or able to infer, I think probably is more accurate, things about the visitor, about their medical conditions and other kind of medical history that might exist about them. Now, whether or not that's true is probably a good opportunity for litigation if someone wanted to pay for that. But what we've seen happening more and more frequently is that folks are taking down the tools just to avoid it because of the penalties that organizations have been hit with, that most other organizations are just taking the tools off their website. Now, there's at least one or two vendors out there that claim to be HIPAA compliant that provides similar sort of tracking technology. And so I think there may be a argument to be made that if that is in fact the case and they're willing to sign a business associate agreement, then it's an even more challenging effort to say that you're out of compliance. I think that the American Hospital Association filed something recently or objected recently to the guidance that was put out by OCR. And I'm having talked to a number of attorneys in the industry, I don't think that I've heard anyone say that it's great guidance. It's a bit difficult to interpret and understand what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And it's, I think, created a number of problems for particularly the more traditional healthcare organizations that are already under a bit of pressure from some of the new entrants into the marketplace that have come in from more of the traditional technology space.
Yeah, thank you. It's a super interesting topic. And I think over the next year, we'll have a lot more insight on the way this is going to go, because I think there's a lot of conflicting opinions on it, and also a lot of activity in the courts and so forth. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And that nicely kind of segues into my next question, and that is, what advice do you have in vendor management? And how do you appropriately allocate risk in these relationships? What are some best practices?
You're hitting all the hard topics today. So, the reason why vendor risk management is such an issue is because if you look back historically over the last few years at what the biggest breaches are in healthcare, they're usually a vendor. It's a vendor and they have a breach and it cascades across lots of players in the healthcare space and becomes these huge problems. And so there's obviously a significant concern on the part of healthcare organizations around the risk associated with their vendors. Now, that said, now you get into the question of, well, how do I manage that effectively? How do I understand the risk associated with the use of any particular vendor? And that becomes a bit challenging. Historically, what organizations have done when they've started down this path is kind of one of two different approaches, or maybe both. One approach is I start asking more specific questions around my vendors and their security programs to understand, again, what controls do they have in place. So it's not just, hey, sign this business associate agreement. I want to understand better what controls you have in place to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the patient information that I'm going to be sharing with you. And so we see questionnaires, and those questionnaires can range anywhere. I've seen from a handful of questions to pages and hundreds of questions, which creates a tremendous burden on the vendors themselves, and they're not exactly thrilled to fill them out, and it's time consuming, et cetera, et cetera. I've also seen organizations that try to leverage some of the new automated solutions out there, the security scorecards, bit sites, and others that purport to go out and scan the publicly visible footprint of the vendor organization. They'll also look at dark websites and other places for information around the vendors, and from that try to generate some sort of insight into the risk associated with that vendor. And that's a little quicker and cheaper way to go. However, there's problems associated with that, as well as those reports often generate a lot of information that isn't necessarily accurate or helpful to the organization who's trying to make a decision around whether or not this vendor is going to be appropriate for them from a risks perspective. So, and I've seen organizations try to do both of those. The problem with the first approach is that tends to be a cost and time problem. It's expensive to do it. It's hard to get the vendors to provide the information. It drags, et cetera, et cetera. And you can get them to do it the first time because they want to make the sale, but then following up on an ongoing basis is problematic, right? They're not as interested then after they've already made the sale. There's been a number of efforts by different organizations to create a platform to share information to make this more efficient. But I think so far, anyway, I think they're struggling with the traditional problem of any sort of platform type solution. You got to get enough folks on at least one side of the platform to draw the others in. And so there's I think that there's a lot of that going on, and kind of still competing sort of interests to be the standard for how we do vendor risk management in the industry.
Yeah, certainly challenging and not a great single solution. So final kind of cutting edge topic here, and that is around artificial intelligence. We couldn't really have a podcast with you and not at least spend a few minutes talking about AI. And really just curious if you're seeing best practices develop for sharing and using data for machine learning. What's new in this space?
Yeah, organizations are a bit all over the place with this as well. I think there's some that are, and I think it probably is reflective of people in general when they start to think about AI. And I think AI and machine learning has been around for a while now. Recently, although we had the launching of these large language learning models like ChatGPT and others that make it much more accessible, I think, to the average person, where you suddenly start to able to engage in these with these technologies, and it makes it very real for folks, as opposed to kind of most of the solutions we've had previously. But we're seeing it all over healthcare, whether it's AI assisting with the reading of scans or AI assisting with chatbots that folks are engaging with, or there's a ton of other solutions as well that where there's applications for artificial intelligence. I think that there's other organizations that are taking a more risky approach to it, where they're just introducing these solutions without having really thought through them. And then there's those folks that are probably the middle of the road, where they recognize the need to adopt artificial intelligence, machine learning enabled solutions within their environment. They also recognize that there's potential risks associated with the use of those solutions, and so they're looking to adopt a governance structure or a risk management structure associated with the adoption of these solutions. And a lot of that is similar to what we've talked about previously with cybersecurity generally. It's understanding the controls around the solution, the use of the data within the solution, how the organization is addressing potential bias in the solutions. And there's a lot of potential issues associated with, the use of artificial intelligence, and having appropriate governance structure, appropriate evaluation, and understanding of the risks associated with those tools is important. And a lot of the leading organizations we're seeing in this space are recognizing that and adopting those types of governance structures. Again, when we work with organizations to do that, we leverage some of the work, again, by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in this space to help them come up with a governance and risk management structure for AI that's going to be effective in their organizations. One of the things when I talk to people about AI, it's like every tool that's ever been developed since the club. It can be used for good or it can be used for evil, and the only difference is that these tools become more and more powerful over time, and their use for good can be exponentially bigger, and their use for bad can be exponentially better. And we just need to recognize that, I think, when we're thinking about using them, and take appropriate precautions to address the risk.
That's a really interesting observation, John. So taking that and then looking forward, what do you see on the horizon for impending cybersecurity threats, for enforcement, and for best practices?
I think we're going to continue to see the cybercrime gangs and other threat actors targeting healthcare in particular, where we tend to be apparently an easy mark for them, and I think that organizations, particularly given the current economic situation, are struggling to appropriately fund their cybersecurity, cyber risk management programs at an appropriate level to address the risk and threats that they face in many cases. So I think that's going to continue to be a challenge going forward. The other thing that we see, and this has been going on for some time as well, is the technology is becoming more complex. As the technology becomes more complex, the risks become more complex, and it's you need more and more specialized knowledge in order to deal with that. And the cybersecurity industry in particular has really struggled finding enough talent, enough folks to meet the need that's out there, not just in healthcare, but more generally across all industries. So that's an ongoing problem as well for us. In healthcare as well as in cybersecurity. So I think we're going to continue to see that. Obviously, artificial intelligence isn't going away. Machine learning isn't going away. And I think that as it becomes more and more adopted and it moves closer and closer to the patient, the risks to patient safety, both from AI, machine learning, but also more generally are going to take a more important become more prominent in their discussions around cybersecurity as we see that the impact of these things on patient safety. One of the other things that is a bit concerning too, in addition to the cyber criminals that are out there, we now have, whenever we have unrest in the political sphere on a global basis, you can start to see hacktivism, where hackers are motivated by some sort of political motivation to go after organizations. And so that becomes an increasing risk as we have more volatility in the world as well. And it's my hope that certainly that, some of the unrest that we see currently in the world, that we're able to find a solution quickly that addresses that, and that it doesn't continue to escalate, but it's certainly a risk that we need to be aware of in healthcare and cybersecurity more generally.
Those are great insights, John, and thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an extremely interesting conversation, and we really appreciate your perspective on all things data security and compliance. If people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way, Jon? Is a LinkedIn or a website you want to share?
So you can always find me on LinkedIn under Jon Moore in Clearwater. Probably clearwatersecurity.com is the easiest way to find us, though. So clearwatersecurity.com, you can request a follow-up directly from the website, and there you can see a lot of the thought leadership that I talked about that we generate from our founding. Our founder, Bob Chaput, that I mentioned earlier, had many careers, even more careers than me in his life, and one of those was as a high school teacher and educator, and that continued on when he developed Clearwater and in his other careers as well. So education for the industry is critically important to us. It's one of our core values at Clearwater. So if you go to clearwatersecurity.com, you can find all sorts of white papers and webinars and other things around the topics that we talked about today, as well as other topics that are in healthcare and in cybersecurity and compliance as well.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Jon. And thanks to everyone who joined today's episode of the Health+Tech podcast. I'm Kristen McDermott Woodrum, and I've had the honor, along with Holly Buckley, of speaking with Jon Moore of Clearwater today. We hope you'll join us for future episodes of this Health+Tech podcast.